Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream Q&A segment 117, not prime but odd.
So odd. Okay,
So odd.
Here we go. From the Discord this week, and it is about the fact that it is from the Discord in some ways, and we alluded to this last week, but Yep, here you go.
I know what's coming.
You know what the question is. Will the DarkHorse Podcast have to move to a new platform now that Discord has bent the knee? And there's a link to an article in The Verge, the first paragraph of which reads, after 2 years of a pandemic, Discord is making its policies more clear about health misinformation. In new community guidelines, which go into effect on March 28th, Discord says users, quote, may not share false or misleading information on Discord that is likely to cause physical or societal harm, end quote. This includes content that could result in damage to physical infrastructure, injury to others, and content that endangers, wait for it, public health.
One has to wonder what the people who make these policies understand about how the world works.
They are 24 and they've been miseducated. And, these I was going to say pronouns, these
Millennials?
Prefixes. No, it's not millennials who are 24 at this point. These prefixes, miss, dis, and mal, are now, of course, completely tainted. But they have been miseducated, and they're young, and the combination means that you put them in charge, and you give them power, and, of course, they're going to make totalitarian and insane rules.
I have to say, I can't accept this. I
didn't say it was cool.
No.
Oh, you don't think the answer is right? Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
How do they think we come to understand what's true in the first place?
It's religion.
It is.
It's a religion, and it imagines that those people who believe the one true thing have been served by God or something, and they don't call it God because they don't think they're religious. It's part of what's going on. These are people who explicitly largely don't think they're religious at all. They think they don't have faith, and this is a question on which you and I, but you especially have talked and thought a lot. And so that they are the recipient of the one true faith, and they don't think it's faith, and therefore what they do to inform those of us who haven't seen the light is just force it on us, like hammer it into our brains or something.
Well,
that they don't have a model beyond that of how it is that we come to understand things.
Okay, that's possible.
I think
that is possible.
Mm-hmm.
There's also another possibility, which is back in the dark days after 9/11, the tech companies were handed mandates with absolutely draconian types of coercion. They were effectively told, you must hand over data on your customers, and if you tell anyone that you have been forced to hand over data, then you are guilty of supporting terrorism.
Tech companies, you said, or like phone companies? Because there wasn't.
Yeah,
this was pre-Facebook. Even,
I'm not saying tech platforms. I'm saying it was phone
comms.
Yeah, communication companies.
Yeah.
And so the point is, if somebody comes to you and they say, "Well, you are required by law to hand over this thing, and you are required by law not to tell anyone that you've handed over this thing." And if you do hand it over, then you're actually helping the terrorists, and we have this law that makes you vulnerable to all sorts of...
So useful.
Right. So the question is something like that taking place here, where Discord, which is, after all, a mechanism for gamers to talk to each other that has been adopted by others, but it doesn't have any business deciding what's true and what's not true. That's not what it's for. We can't have companies that make paper decide they're not going to sell paper to people who write bad ideas on it. It can't have an opinion, and yet it seems to. And the question is, does it have an opinion because the people who run it are that... Is there a nice synonym for dumb? Because it's really dumb to think that that you could actually run a society in which you're not allowed to discuss the possibility that the officials are wrong.
Is batshit crazy considered a nice synonym?
I like it.
Okay.
But the basic point is, I don't know whether this is the behavior of people who are confronted with some kind of coercion that we can't see, or is this actually them being brown shirts and doing the bidding of something?
Well, I guess I would also ask if those are two fully distinct categories. I don't think they are.
No, I think they are. I think
say them again then.
I mean, maybe I don't know my history well enough, but my sense is that brown shirts are effectively not coerced into brown shirting. They are
conscious of what they are enacting.
They are taking it upon themselves to advance the policy.
Okay. Yep. So I guess I was hearing like brown shirty behavior, but yeah, like people come to be true believers and may not be in the employ of something that is forcing them in any way, but they come to welcome more and more the role that they had adopted unwittingly at first.
Yeah. I mean, it is in fact just simply a kind of fascism where effectively the powerful nation becomes a bludgeon, and it goes after entities that cannot protect themselves. So Indeed. The short answer for the Discord folks is that we certainly need a backup plan and probably need to enact it because...
So that's let me do this.
Yeah.
We need a short-term backup plan right away, and we are working on it. We need a longer-term plan that will be immune to such coercion, but of course it needs to be immune at all the layers. And part of the call for web developers from a few weeks ago, and no, we don't need any more, we had so many amazing applicants, is in part in service of potentially building, at the moment, Discord is a perk of being on our Patreons, and is where the DarkHorse community lives. And if we had something that was independent of Discord and of Patreon and of all of these sorts of tech platforms, which are demonstrably censorious, which are like eagerly censorious now, the community would be more robust, and we would as well. And so obviously that's something that we want. It will take time to build, but it is the long-term plan to do so. And we also need a short-term backup, and we're working on that as well.
Yeah, it's the malinformation that gets you.
It's always something. All right, first question from the darkhorsesubmissions.com site for this week. On a rare early 60-degree day, I opted to take a bike ride, and upon entering the outside and open trail, I passed a woman and small child wearing masks. They were faceless other than their hollow eyes. I felt myself sigh deeply and then filled with anger and rage. After 30 years working for a small company, we are closing. They took so much. I am judging others. I am angry at they. Is it misdirected? Am I a horrible person? Am I a feature or a bug? Love to you both. Such an amazing, brief soliloquy. And I think while this is the work of poetry and of literature right here, is that there is a particular experience that you had, and it speaks to a general human experience that so many of us are having now. The particular describes and evokes the universal. And are you a horrible person? No. Are all of us, I expect, having moments, hopefully not whole days or weeks or months, but at least moments of rage and of anger now? Yeah, I assume that almost everyone is, and rage and anger are, I think, never the best approach. But the faceless, other than the hollow eyes, the small company that closes after 30 years, because how could you possibly withstand this level of coercion and arbitrariness, absent having a side way in to get perks that you never needed because you were doing honorable work? And as long as there was freedom to explore and expand and innovate, you could do it. Of course there will be some anger and rage, and again, it's not the most effective response, but recognizing that can be, and then diverting it, but I'm not sure to what. I don't know what all the responses should be at this point.
Personally, I'm having difficulty I'm pretty good at managing my anger until we get to the kids. And the problem with the anger, which I think is justly deployed on behalf of the children, is that their parents are culpable. And not fully culpable.
They've been duped, many of them. Right?
They've been duped, but I mean, basically it comes down to this. The parents have an obligation to protect their children from predatory stuff. And that means that it's also your obligation to be on the lookout for predatory stuff. And to the extent that we have adults masking their children outside, I don't think you were on the lookout. I think if you were on the lookout, you'd know that outside was safe, and you would understand that your child benefits from not being trained into the expectation of wearing a mask. And so it's not that I don't have, I have unlimited forgiveness for anyone who was fooled without being willing to be fooled. But I feel like there's too much willingness to be fooled. There's too much.
What's the distinction you're making? I'm not sure yet.
If you were actually fooled, that's not on you. But if you avoided the information that said something is wrong here, actually my child is safe several times over. They're healthy, they're young, and we're talking about outdoors. And what's more, even if I, as a parent, don't know what to make of the developmental hazard of masks, I know that some people think that there might be some. Then the point is, you might try to make a rule that said, well, how about just indoors? Why don't you make sure to take that thing off every time we're outdoors? As you walk back and forth to school, take it off, but inside, wear it. Right? If you made that rule, I think you're still making an error. But the point is, it's an error. You tried to do the right thing, and you just drew the line in a place that I don't think is the right one.
So I'm trying to figure out how you would operationalize your distinction between willingly fooled and I don't know exactly what, like just unwillingly fooled or something. So it doesn't quite track for me. And I think in part because maybe what I just heard was, did you draw any line at all? If you drew no line, if you accepted the changing rhetoric and policies every single time it came, and even when it was clearly in contradiction with previous things, and there had been nothing to explain the discrepancy, then you're in the simply fooled camp. But if you drew any line at all, no matter how insipid that line may seem to some of us, but if you were assessing, if you were doing some assessment and working on behalf of your child and your child's future to not have them be dragged down with whatever this madness is, then you are more forgiving. Is it about having drawn any line at all?
I'll even go one step further. Okay. I think if you tried to draw a line, you'd draw a line. But if you thought about, well, should I draw a line? And you looked at it and you thought, actually, no, their line is about right. That's still, you put in the work, right? And it's not that I honor the work itself, but the point is you didn't.
Yeah, that's a funny thing for you to say after the last hour.
Well, but my point is.
You actually did.
You were willing to draw a line.
Yeah.
You just didn't find the line to draw. And so,
well, but then this is where I find it difficult to operationalize, because everyone will claim, we see this, right? Like everyone will go, well, I was skeptical back then, and we'll see the most authoritarian lockstep yahoos claiming that because the placement of a comma in some tweet indicates skepticism from 2 years ago, right? Like everyone is going to re-envision their own history and proclaim that they were the ones who were doing the equivalent of taking risks to protect people.
I don't think it's so difficult, because I think what actually happened is that an awful lot of people are engaging in the equivalent of taking a bribe. The parents are selling out their own children in order to look virtuous in the eyes of strangers.
Yep.
And that is not honorable. Right? The point is, you actually have an obligation to absolutely ignore what strangers think of you in order to protect your child. And the idea, and we see the same thing with the trans stuff.
That's exactly. I mean, that reveals it. that's shocking, right? That parents are willing to give their children puberty blockers and their adolescents cross-sex hormones and let them get mutilating surgeries that almost guarantee sterility and a lifetime of hell, right? That's much farther than what most parents have been doing, who have just been following along with the CDC and just trust all the authorities, right? So maybe at some level, why are we surprised? Like we have already been living for many years a complete hellscape with a tiny fraction, granted, of parents who are willing to do total abominations to their children.
Well, but let's make the model complete. The point is, you've got a gradient, right? How far are you falling down on your parental obligation? Right. And the point is, we had people who were ahead of the curve, who were falling down on their obligation to the level that they were allowing medical mutilation of their children as a result of some brand new sophistication that they were told was a deep insight into human sexuality. And that's obviously an egregious breach. Right. This was much easier. Right. It was much easier for somebody who might have called foul on that to go along with the CDC's nonsense on masks to a degree. But again, the point is, I think a lot of people fell down at one of two levels. Either they were corruptible because it was so delightful to broadcast your virtue via mask or whatever, and broadcast your commitment to the community by masking your child or something like that. So there were people who fell victim to an incentive, effectively an emotional bribe, and betrayed their children because of that. And then there were other people who were just paralyzed by not knowing what to think about corrupted authorities. What would you do, if the authority is actually a menace to your child? And they just didn't have the architecture, which is a smaller failure.
Smaller
than accepting an emotional bribe to betray your child.
Well, I guess we should probably move on, but I think I would approach it differently. And I think, in fact, I do, as we have said many, many times, we understand trans to be an exceedingly rare but real condition that in some cases actually has to do with genetic anomalies. And it is the completely novel, the hyper novel way that really 21st century, but to some degree late 20th century, Westerners have decided to deal with it. That is the giant freaking problem, the medicalization through puberty blockers, through cross-sex hormones, and through surgery of something that is, for the vast majority of people who experience any kind of gender dysphoria, going to be fleeting. And they will recover and they will be fine unless they've had a medicalization of what has happened. But that has been in the water. Hopefully not literally, but it's hormones probably has been. But that has been in the cultural waterscape for many years now. And those people who identify as blue and liberal and Democrats and all have kind of had to take a stand. And most of the people who are looking at the medicalization of kids who declare themselves trans, who don't agree with it, and I do think that was a strong majority, at least at first, have just been quiet about it because they see what happens, to people like us, but especially to people like Abigail Schreier, right? Who wrote an extraordinary and very compassionate book. And she has just been vilified, right? So you see that. You see that if you question not transness, but the medicalization, and if you even talk about social contagion as a causal factor, right, then you get destroyed, then you get canceled, yes, or there are attempts made to do that. Then comes along this thing, which increasingly I am averse to calling it a pandemic, but this thing that we immediately all jump in and say, oh my God, the pandemic, and we are sold very quickly on this promise of magical mystery vaccines that will show up much sooner than we could have ever imagined that happening before. And those of us who were skeptical of the medicalization of anything, but specifically questioning the wisdom of the medicalization of children who had declared themselves trans, were more likely to say, maybe let's see. And those who were either silent or who had jumped on board with the medicalization of transness were going to be much more likely to be like, yeehaw, let's do this because we know that high tech and high medicalization is the solution to 21st century human problems. And frankly, that's, Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century is the antidote to that kind of reductionist, over-technical, over-engineered thinking in favor of a recognition that we need progress, but we need to understand ourselves as biological systems, which are complex and not simple.
Well, and this is, I think the underlying problem is that we have supplanted a traditional way of passing on the ethics and methodology of parenting, right? We have displaced what would have been a religious framework in which we told you what the job of a parent was, and you got the idea, hey, actually, I'm supposed to be ready to trade my life to protect this person. There are bad forces in the world. They may come for your child, and that doesn't leave you a lot of options. Right? That thing has been thrown out.
When you become a parent, you are no longer the most important person in your own life.
Right. And in throwing it out, what we didn't do was replace it with something useful. What we left was a vacuum that has now been filled with Anthony Fauci and whatever else.
But it was filled before by the schools, right? Like, a lot of people really thought that the schools were supposed to be doing the job that historically parents have done.
Right.
And there are a lot of us who are like, yeah, no thanks. Schools, hopefully good for socialization, substantially less good at actually educating. But in terms of teaching moral lessons, which is, of course, what a lot of the DEI stuff, the diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually doing, many of us from the beginning are like, that, not your job. And no, thank you. I do not need to be relieved of that job. That is my job as the parent, and I'm going to keep it.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a long answer. My 3-year-old asked why thumbs, unlike other fingers, are curved. Seems useful for putting hands on the floor, palm not touching, thumb like a kickstand. Oh, thumb like a kickstand. Okay, yeah, cool. This is Echo asking, who is a dancer, like breakdancers do. It proves that dance comes from monkeys, fish, sponges, cells. I don't know what the last part means, yeah, why are they curved unlike the other fingers? It does. It does allow for this. Yeah, exactly. It curves back. The other finger. I think some people can curve their fingers back, but for the most of us, that doesn't happen. Whereas the thumb, and some people their thumbs curve way back. Mine doesn't curve all that much back. The curve may have to do with the opposability.
I think it does.
Such that. And I think the big toe actually also has a little bit of a curve to it, and of course our relatives have opposable big toes as well.
I don't know who would oppose them though. Gotcha. I think it's going to have to do with the thumb being shorter and mounted lower on the hand, and so in order to get it to meet flat effectively, it has to be curved back. That'd be my guess.
Oh, well, it's also on a different plane, right? So the 4 fingers are all on this plane, and it's kind of like it. You have to kind of twist it in. It's like 20 degrees off the plane. It's like the thumbnail. Like, do this, guys, and look at your 4 nails, and you see that the 4 fingers, the nails are all in one plane, are all in one plane. I don't know how else to say it. And the thumb is on a plane that's about 20 degrees off of that.
Yeah.
But it's rotated already. It's already rotated on the plane of the hand. And so an additional curve in the digit would be an accommodation as well. So everything about it is different.
It's on a different plane, and it wasn't a nonstop.
Aviation evolution puns. Okay. That's where we are. Okay.
I don't know what it means, but I felt like it needed to be said.
Apparently. Okay, next question. If the lab COVID creators are making the grave error of believing the feeble and cartoonish textbook evolutionary story, placing a function-gained viral hill-climbing program on the foothills of a mountain range they know little about and expecting to control its evolutionary trajectory.
Woo, I love this person. Who is this?
Yeah, this is the Archimedes effect.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so I'm going to leave out the parenthetical and get to the end of the which was great, but I just read the question through without the parenthetical. If the lab COVID creators are making the grave error of believing the feeble and cartoonish textbook evolutionary story, are AGI creators making the same error? Our AGI being artificial general intelligence. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
That's the thought. Now,
Yeah.
the question is, how close are they to producing anything that is usefully dangerous? And
Just because they're not close yet doesn't mean they won't get there.
well, my argument has been they already did it to us, and they did it to us, and we didn't notice because it's algorithms, not robots.
Yeah.
Right? They haven't gotten there with the robots. They've actually done better than I thought they were going to. But, but nonetheless,
Yep.
the thing that is destroying the world with artificial general intelligence isn't artificial general intelligence. It's specific algorithmic intelligence that is destroying our minds through.
We've been parasitized by heuristics.
We've been parasitized by heuristics. Even the people who wrote these things don't know what they do, and
can't stop them.
Can't stop
Right.
them. And the world is obviously manifestly insane. So this is a strong contender for the pathology that caused that to happen, and we ought to think about it.
Yes.
So yes,
And yes.
yeah.
Yes. What? Oh, gosh. I love this question. I could lecture for hours on this question. I'm not going to. I'm not. You guess what's coming. You have no idea. What must the it has nothing to do with anything we've talked about today, or for weeks even. But I'm going
to find a connection.
Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to it. What must the transition have been like as we moved from oviparity to viviparity? Did shells get soft and become placentas? Were there many stillbirths along the way? How much can we extrapolate about the mechanisms? I actually thought at one point, relatively late in the game at Evergreen, that I wanted to start a research program in the various reproductive transitions, including oviparity, viviparity, and wait for it, ovoviviparity. So I have hours of material that I could yammer on about this, but I will say simply, because we just don't have...
You need to define the terms.
Okay, so I will say simply what these three terms mean, and mostly leave it at that for now. Oviparity, ovo, egg, parity, mode of birth. You lay eggs as the way that you bring forth new life into the world, if you are female. Viviparity, viva, live. Parity again, mode of birth. So we mammals, other than the monotremes, which are the echidnas and the duck-billed platypus, are viviparous. We give live birth. And then ovoviviparity, egg live birth, what the hell is that, is in fact an intermediate stage and persists in many squamates, that is snakes and lizards, and indeed in some parts of the range of some snakes, you have some that are one and some that are the other, and it's an environmental response to the values and virtues of either having your kid on you and being weighted down with it as you are out foraging, or being able to leave it behind, having left it in an egg somewhere, but risking it therefore being discovered by something that wants to eat it. And of course, there are additional advantages. Once, if you are oviparous, once that shell closes, you cannot, as the mother, provide any more direct nutrients until it hatches. It is what it is, and it's going to, you can protect it, you can heat it, you can cool it within reason, but you don't have any ability to control the nutrient load. Whatever yolk, for instance, in an amniote was inside that shell at the point that the shell got laid down is what it's got. Viviparity at the other end, specifically placental mammals being one of the three groups of mammals of which we are some, allows for the greatest amount of changes in parental, specifically maternal, giving of nutrients to the offspring. And of course, actually paternal influence can make a difference through genomic imprinting, which is its own thing. Like genes that came from dad are more likely to try to draw nutrients from mom into the fetus, and genes that come from mom, alleles that come from mom, are more likely to restrict the fast flow of nutrients from mom to fetus, so that mom has a greater chance of actually going on to produce more. That's one of many asides that we could go to. Ovoviviparity is this intermediate stage, which not all organisms that have transitioned have presumably gone through, but maybe, in which you actually retain eggs inside your body. And so you have an egg, which means that there is no direct transfer between mother and embryo once you have the egg. But you have the advantage of carrying your babies with you wherever you go. So if you are in an environment, for instance, in which predation, especially predation of babies, is particularly high, there will be a benefit to you of ovoviviparity over either potentially oviparity or viviparity.
Right.
I could clearly go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Which I think is the answer to the question. That the transition will have to have, I mean, theoretically speaking, I would argue that maybe there's an exception, but that in general, the oviparous creatures will have gone ovoviviparous before they go viviparous. I hope I'm using the terms right. But the basic point being, there's a good reason to retain, even if you're an egg layer, there are lots of good reasons to retain eggs, just the same way that in marsupials, a kangaroo will produce a joey and then put the joey in the pouch. And the point is, all of these things are variations on the same theme, which is there's a vulnerability to an offspring left behind. There is a cost to carrying an offspring with you. The various ecological and other considerations will shift these things.
The number of ways that mammals do this is actually extraordinary. So just put aside the monotremes, the egg-laying mammals for the moment, but like marsupials can have 3 dependent kids at a time.
Yep.
They can have a very early embryo still in utero, a very young joey that has been birthed but is tiny and basically is the size of like less than a peanut that came out, is now in the pouch at the teat and completely attached, and then a joey who's still nursing but is more or less independent. 3 very differently aged but still fully dependent kids at a time. And there's lots of kinds of diapause and other reproductive ways that mammals can control, that the female mammals can control their own reproduction. And I realized that I forgot to explain the final part of ovoviviparity, which is that those eggs inside the body of an ovoviviparous organism, often a snake, they're soft-shelled, so it's not hard calcified shells like we think of with birds, but they hatch just before they're born. And so, they live as eggs inside the mother, and then they hatch and are born right away.
So I'm going to guess that actually there's an ovoviviparous stage, and then prior to the evolution of viviparous birth, you will have the elimination of the shell, and that this will then set the stage for the transition.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to say, but not right now. Possibly seen as inflammatory by YouTube, so feel free to punt on this question. But given the state of the world, it might be useful to talk about when a society has the moral right to use violence rather than election to remove bad leaders.
Oh, this is such a good question, and it's one that I have been trying to figure out. It's funny. Remember when we were in school, like as kids? We used to talk about things like the founding of the nation, and the nation was founded with a certain amount of violence. Right.
We were in school in the bicentennial, so we got a whole year in 1976 of a lot of
men.
We were young kids in school then,
And the point was, somehow, even talking to small children about it, everybody understood that there were things in the political landscape that would justify violence.
Right.
Now, everybody still does know this, but we're not allowed to say it, because the point is all of the post 9/11 stuff has been set up as a low bar that as you begin to think independently or to look at your leaders and say, oh my God, what has taken those people over? What are they doing to us?
Yep.
You will trip over these things. And the point is, oh, you're the enemy. And the answer is no, I'm not the enemy. In fact, Thomas Jefferson very famously said that the tree of liberty must periodically be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And he was very specifically making this point, which was that tyranny is not going anywhere, and it is going to be patriots that put a stop to it, and it is going to be bloody. Right?
And this, Jefferson was like the anti-utopian. He understood that no matter how good a system you erect, it will decay over time and will need to be refreshed.
Right, which is actually, and it anticipates. So what I say is that the founders set up an evolutionary system. They didn't know it was an evolutionary system because nobody knew what an evolutionary system was. And that's part of the problem, is that it keeps evolving out from under us. Right. And so you have to build a process that counteracts that. But he anticipates this. And he basically says, look, I don't think we've solved the problem. I think we've built something that can be a solution, and it's going to need to be reactivated periodically. So anyway, it's a great question. I don't know how. Where is the place? It's not Discord, apparently. Where is the place where we can go have an intelligent adult conversation about how it is that people who abhor violence know when it is time to bring violence back? How do we have that conversation? It's imperative that we must, clearly, and that is not anybody advocating for violence. It is simply pointing out that this is a canonical, that the question is, when have things gotten bad enough that violence is the only answer?
Right. Yes. Do you think, I actually didn't see when we started, Zach. Can you just give me a starting time or where we're at now?
You can join for about 37 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Do you think ivermectin could be used regularly to prevent virus, like HPV-caused cancers? Are you aware of any other cancers caused by a virus?
Yes.
The Tasmanian
devil nose virus.
Is it like a, I don't have a thought. Is it a rhinovirus?
No, but it attacks the rostrum. I forget what kind of virus it is.
Yeah.
But yes, there are, well, let's put it this way.
So the first part of the question, I don't know. I don't know about ivermectin.
There are various tumors that are induced by viruses. My guess is the more we know, the more we're going to discover that lots of things that we didn't think were virally induced were. That lots of disruptions that turn into things like tumors are going to turn out to have a viral origin.
That's interesting. I am actually having maybe the opposite, but not necessarily inconsistent with that thought these last few weeks, which is I am suspecting that the more we learn, the more we are going to recognize how many viruses we have as fellow travelers all the time, such that finding some virus in a person will not end up being able to be linked plausibly to being a causative factor.
I think they're both true.
Yeah, I think they're both true as well.
And the scary thing, in the case of the Tasmanian devils, you have effectively a contagious cancer because it is the virus that triggers it. Now the question is, what if that's more common than we think?
Yeah.
Right? This is plausible.
Yeah.
but I would say,
that's not the model for cancer at all, right?
I am concerned in the case of the HPV story that actually we have a bad model. And I'm not saying that we do have a bad model, but I am saying there are things in play in this realm like telomerase in the production of sperm that could play a role in this story that we do not understand. And let's just say it is a place where I have thought there's something about what we are being told here that doesn't fully add up, but I don't know what it is that's bugging me yet. So I'm not saying it is not the story we've been given, but I'm saying we have a system that we know blinds itself, has confirmation bias, is corrupted when there's a product to be sold, and one has to wonder.
Indeed.
I will also point out, though, the HPV case and the HPV vaccine is a place where there's a question about what the right public health response is. It anticipates much of what we've been through with COVID because, in general, it's not 100%, but in general, boys do not suffer from HPV, though they do
transmit it.
They transmit it.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what should we be doing about HPV and vaccines? Do you vaccinate boys who don't have a risk to protect girls? And the answer is that's a transfer of health because these vaccines are not perfectly safe. So anyway, it is a place where those questions are opened, having nothing to do with COVID.
Yeah. Do you have any insight into the first part of the question with regard to ivermectin? I don't.
The first part of the question is, could ivermectin...
Do you think ivermectin could be used regularly to prevent virus-caused cancers?
Well, what we know is that it seems to be effective against many kinds of viruses.
Yep.
We need to know more about.
Yeah, I don't know anything about even like are viruses that cause cancers, to the extent that we know that there are at least two, and we think that there are probably going to be more. Are they phylogenetically conserved? Like, is that a single evolution of viruses that cause cancers? Probably not, given that we got Tasmanian devils and humans, right?
I'll bet no.
Probably not. In which case, what is it about those viruses that allows them to cause cancers, and what is it the mechanism of action in ivermectin that allows it to be effective against viruses? And are those two what ifs? What is are those two mechanisms simpatico with one another? I don't know. I don't know enough to answer that.
Right, and I would say that there is also a question about. Let's say that we found that ivermectin was useful in this case. Mm-hmm. There's a question about how to preserve its utility, how to not repeat the failure that came with antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. And on the one hand, there's reason to think ivermectin will be less susceptible, but I do not think it is not susceptible.
Yep.
And the trajectory, the fact that the dosage necessary to be useful in the context of COVID went spectacularly up suggests...
With Delta rather than with the original variants, Yep.
Yeah, suggests that this is something to treat very carefully.
Yeah. Evolutionary explanation. Sorry, I'm just looking at various questions here. Do you have an evolutionary explanation of why nails on a chalkboard sound so awful?
It depends.
I can't even read the question without getting all shivery.
Some of us love it.
No, you don't.
I don't hate it.
Okay, that's different.
Yeah.
Toby and I actually don't know how you feel about it, Zach.
Kind of awful, but it's not like the worst thing.
Okay, whereas Toby and I, our 15-year-old and I, both have don't do that.
So
response.
So
what's that? Wait.
Chalkboard's terrible. You have a pleat thing, which is weird.
Oh yeah, the metal on some of, but not all of the ceramic plates that we have. The something about the glaze on some of the plates gets both Toby and me when metal hits it, when silverware hits it, and not some of the other plates.
For me, it's not actually the sound; it's the thought of actually putting the nails on the chalkboard in that position.
So
can people hear you, Zach?
Not very.
I see. Okay, so this is fascinating.
Let me ask a question.
Okay. Whom are you asking?
I'm asking you a question.
Oh, okay.
Supposing we had a chalkboard and someone was to scrape their nails down it, is it a physically painful sensation?
Physically painful. It makes me tense up everywhere. It feels visceral, sort of like gut visceral, but I actually feel it like in my I have to work not to hunch my shoulders up and.
Well, okay. So evolutionary explanation.
Yeah, I don't pain. No, but deep visceral discomfort.
So the question.
I don't know what the question was in service of though. What's the?
I'm just trying to figure out what would have to be true in order. It's possible that this has no evolutionary meaning, that it is such an unusual noise.
Chalkboards being rather new in evolutionary history.
Yeah, the noise is one you just wouldn't encounter, and there's something in the cochlea that causes a interference pattern that is bad for your hearing or something.
And maybe you just got a particularly shaped one that some frequencies just get you,
some of us don't, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Alternatively, it could be that it mirrors some sound in nature that is very ominous, and therefore you have a special detector. The way we
being
have
dive bombed by 3 giant hawks.
Right.
I mean, it's a little bit like the soaring cry of a hawk. Of all the sounds that I can think of in nature, which I like, but it's not beautiful. I like it when I hear that outside because I know what it actually stands for, and I go looking for the bird. But it's not a beautiful sound.
Yeah, but it doesn't trigger any of the revulsion.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, it's not revulsion. Visceral discomfort. It's not revulsion. It's not disgust. It's not pain.
Okay.
What's the
I think
question?
you're all making it up.
Evolution explanation.
Yeah.
So, you think we're making it up? Okay. You think this is
So
fiction?
it could be
Great.
novel, that it's a sufficiently unusual noise that just does some unanticipated thing.
Yeah.
It could be that it is like some noise that has some meaning that is specially hardwired to catch your attention.
It could be, and I don't recall anything like this, nor do I know of anything like it in Toby's childhood, but it could be developmental, such that, if you had, I guess what I imagine is that like a nail gets ripped off or something on a chalkboard. Like that's sort of what I imagine might be the bad thing that happens. And of course, nails being ripped off is very bad. But I don't, I've never had that happen. My nails don't tear. So like, it's not something that I'm otherwise concerned with, but it could also be actually you had some experience pulling your nails backwards and having something bad happen such that is triggering you. I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm wondering also.
So you had, could be an indicator of a warning, as happens in nature. Could be just a hyper novelty that has no meaning.
Right. I'm wondering, I should know, but in the cochlea, lower sounds are early in the spiral, right?
I don't remember.
I think so. So I'm wondering whether or not effectively the scraping on the chalkboard is at the high end of what your cochlea can handle. And if for some people it intersects the very highest thing, if there might not be some discomfort there. And for some of us, either our cochlea doesn't go that far, which would be
well,
weird
I was just going
hear
to,
it.
well, but it might actually, the prediction of that might be that it's sex linked, right? That, men typically not having the higher end frequency capacity as much can hear it, sure, but they don't hear it the same way, and it may not be triggering the same response as a result. And
I think it's anti-sex linked.
really?
Yes, that's the kind
What
of
does
noise
that mean?
it doesn't put anybody in the mood. I mean, I'm not wrong, am I?
Well, we could do a survey.
Yes, absolutely.
You go ahead and make that happen.
Oh no, I was thinking of some kind of a form we could have people fill out.
That's
Yeah, no, I'm not going to put one
Zach
together
says that's
now,
a survey, but you were just thinking of other things that don't put anyone in the mood. Having a form to fill out.
Oh, sure. Having a form to fill out.
And being handed one non-functional pen after another.
Standing in line.
The DMV generally.
DMV. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. What's your take on Trudeau being Castro's biological son?
I'm for it.
I actually just saw a little bit. Jordan Peterson was asked this on something, and I liked his take. I agree with his take mostly, although I actually read a couple of articles and I was like, the evidence seems kind of good. That's freaking weird, and it doesn't change anything. Yeah, it just doesn't matter at all. And that was the part, like Jordan gave this answer. He was like, it's disrespectful to the mom, and it's just gossip, and like that's all true. Well, it's just gossip part, but like, there is a lot of circumstantially compelling evidence, but it also just doesn't make any difference at all. And the thing that Jordan said that I hadn't quite framed in this way was like, what, do people think that communism is genetic? Like, like that's not how it works. So really at the end of the day, does it matter? No.
Right. Well, I'm going to connect this back, and I'm going to say that this is rather a lot like the question of, is it or is it not gene therapy? That basically the point is...
that's weird. Okay.
Well, let's put it this way.
It's true or not.
He could be, or he could not be, but he definitely sucks. You know what I'm saying? It's like that.
This is like Schrodinger's Trudeau lineage. It doesn't matter. The cat is dead. The cat's not dead.
The cat sucks one way or the other is basically what it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Does enforcing brick-in-the-wall science kill creativity in science and ideas?
Yes. 100%. 100%. And
Yeah.
the problem is that it is hard to defend what you would have to do in order to teach people to do the innovative work at the frontier. It's the most important that it be done, and it's the hardest to teach, and it is impossible to defend.
Yeah. How in training was your academic experience? It's a super interesting question.
Yes.
And that we could both write books on that. One of many approaches to take, and maybe we take a few of them here, but the first thing that comes to mind actually for me is that when we were applying to grad school, and Bob Trivers, maybe the greatest living evolutionary biologist, was our undergraduate advisor in giving us advice of a variety of sorts, including go to a place with a great museum, make sure you end up interacting with undergraduates in your career, a number of things. But one of the things, I don't remember if this came directly from him, but I remember sort of in the stew of thinking as we were applying to places, and then once we arrived, was that at that time, there were really, at least in like evolution, ecology, and organismal biology departments, and we were in an integrative biology department, but for people doing so-called skin-out biology, like organism and up-level biology, and I'm sure this is true in other fields as well, but at least within biology at the time, there were two broad approaches. And one of them was you can't get in to a department, to a PhD program, say, unless you also get accepted by a professor who has a space in their lab sort of metaphorical in some cases, if they're field biologists, who will take you under their wing. And the expectation is that they have a research program and they are going to be the PI, the principal investigator on grants, and you will sort of slot into one of the minor questions, and maybe you get to ask a minor question that's related, but you get, all of the sort of the goodies associated with being under the umbrella of someone who's already got an established research program. But that does mean also that you end up at the end of your graduate work with a PhD, but never having actually done all the pieces of science from the beginning to the end. In fact, you may have done very little of it. The only parts you may have done might well have been data collection and literature review, which, maybe statistical analysis, but even that was already getting outsourced a lot. And you probably didn't come up with your own system, your own question, your own hypotheses, your own predictions, your experimental design, have to get your own funding, have to even, write it up on your own and figure out what all that was. And the alternative, and so that was then already the dominant kind of academic department into which you could get admitted to earn a PhD in biology.
I want to put one more thing on that one before you move on to the alternative.
Okay.
The other thing is that sets up the god-awful scientific world we live in, where PIs routinely steal from their underlings. And the basic point is, well, I was stolen from when I was an underling. And what you do is if you move up the ranks, you earn the right to steal from your underlings. And if they're any good, then they'll earn the right to steal from theirs.
This is just the time of life.
Yeah, and here's the thing.
Yeah.
The thing that happened between me and Carol Greider, part of the story, I think, is that Carol Greider came from a part of biology where stealing from your underlings is what the PI does. And I showed up from a part of biology. I showed up from a lab where we were actually forbidden by our very excellent
Okay, but I'm going to be getting, you're going out of order. You're making this very hard to understand for those who don't already know the story.
Anyway, but the point is that system where stealing from underlings is the expectation is part of why the world looks the way it does. Okay, so that is the end result of you being brought in and washing glassware and then collecting some data on some question you didn't come up with.
In lab-based science, it might be, washing glassware is a little bit of a caricature, and certainly in field science, it wouldn't be that exactly, but not asking your own questions. And it was already the dominant thing. It was already definitely the majority of types of departments at the point that we were applying. And at this point, it may be the only thing left. And certainly throughout our years teaching at Evergreen, when I was advising students who were hell-bent on going to graduate school in biology, I would describe this to them and say, especially coming from a system where you've actually been doing a complete piece of science. Like you went through my animal behavior program, you had to do everything from beginning to end. And yes, it was low tech, and so you probably didn't have to get grants, but you had to do everything. And you will not be happy pretending to earn a higher degree, or like actually earning a higher degree, working under the thumb of someone who maybe it's been 10 years since they even had an original thought, but they certainly don't expect one from you. So, that's the dominant thing. And then the alternative, which Michigan was the outstanding example of, and I think there were a few others, but I don't remember offhand what they were, was you come in and no professor has had to say, oh yeah, I want that person. They're going to come into my lab. I'm going to vouch for them. It's sink or swim. It's like fiercely competitive, and Michigan had a much higher fail-out rate among its graduate students in the PhD program than any of these other systems, because basically, if a PI has already said, yeah, I want that person and that person and that person, or I can only take one a year or whatever, they may be relying on them to collect data and therefore be much less likely to let them drop out. Whereas if you get, I think our entering class was like 14, and I think maybe 6 of us ended up with PhDs ultimately. Yeah. I'm not totally sure of those numbers, but it was something like that. And basically, you spend the first several years, I hate this metaphor, but like shopping around, like working closely with different faculty. And, the first year there was the, meet the professors, where professors from all over the department would come in and give spiels about their work. And then we would be free to ask them questions. And, we didn't do rotations, but I at least worked with a couple of faculty before landing with Arnold Kluge, who ended up being my major advisor, and who was amazing. But at any point, if I had been like, my God, I can't figure out who to work with, I don't have a question, why isn't anyone helping me? The department would have been happy to be like, okay, well, then leave.
Yep.
Right? Whereas a department where you come in under the auspices of a professor and therefore have their funding, and therefore they're expecting your data to be collected, you're much less likely to be able to leave. And therefore, I think, and this will seem maybe biased and self-serving, but I don't think it is, you are less likely to have students who are graduating from those programs with those PhDs actually be fully qualified as scientists who've gone through all of the steps they need to go through to call themselves scientists.
Which is one of the reasons that we saw such a massive failure of science over COVID. Is that, frankly, having gotten your degree doesn't really say that you know how this is done.
Right.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So there's a ton more to say about training in academics, but maybe
I will just say
was a lot,
I didn't get trained at all because I was never any good at school, and so school just kind of failed to reach me for both better and worse. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of better, right? The bad parts of school can really get in the way, and so anyway, didn't have that effect, and I was incredibly lucky, especially at graduate school, to find a lab where that was understood, right? Yep. Nick Alexander was very unusual in this regard, and he specifically didn't want you working on the questions he was working on.
Yep.
And he was specifically ready to mentor work that was not in his neighborhood.
That's right. Yep. And that was true of Arnold as well. I think Arnold may have had a couple of students at some points who did work on varanids and such, and like monitor lizard phylogenetics, which is one of the things that he worked. Maybe he did. I actually don't remember. He did a lot of work on a lot of different things. He himself was a generalist, as of course Dick was. Dick Alexander. Arnold Kluge is still a generalist. But his expectations of me and Jen, for instance, who were his students together, Jen Ost, were never that we worked on anything like what he was working on.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Don't we educate at the resolution of ability? Isn't that a form of marketing? Don't we need to arm the suckers? People with low resolution? ? I'm not sure what that means.
I don't get it yet.
Yeah. Don't we educate at the resolution?
All right.
You want to riff a little bit?
I can't quite parse the question, but I think I know what the person is on about and what the answer is.
You're going to ask the question you think they might have been.
I'm going to answer the question I think they were trying to ask.
Yep.
In my opinion, and I believe this quite strongly, a healthy human, all healthy humans are similarly capable at birth. This will not always have been the case. There have to have been differences in capacity that were genetically encoded in order for genes that made bigger brains to outcompete smaller brains. That has to have been the case. But in current circumstances, modern humans, I believe to be similarly capable, if healthy, at birth. And therefore, what happens that creates what is an unfortunate and massive disparity in capability of adults is different developmental experiences. Which, if that is correct, if it's actually anywhere near correct, then the basic point is we are leaving a tremendous amount of value on the table by exposing people who have the potential to be geniuses to environments that do not enrich their minds and leave them hobbled relative to what they might be. That's what we're doing, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And so, anyway, my point would be, do we have to arm the people who aren't so capable? The answer is they're only not capable because we've failed to give them the tools that would have made them capable. And that's really the thing that's so tragic, right? You have this incredibly high capacity brain, and we turn it into a feeble mind by not confronting it with the stuff that would upgrade it. And there's no good reason that we failed to. We could do that. We could at least carefully study the question of how to enhance it. And instead, I think we're busy doing other things like making people compliant.
Mm-hmm. Here's a comment. Increased vascularity, or a hypothesis, I guess. Increased vascularity in men likely explains some of why men have more myocarditis. Compare the veins in the back of both of your hands. Much love from a Canadian paramedic fan.
Yeah,
yep.
More obvious anyway.
It's more obvious, and I mean we know. Yes, thank you for the sort of immediate check, but we know that men have more vascularized tissues, and this is part of what explains greater aerobic capacity and therefore greater athletic capacity.
Okay, but wait. I want to ask you a couple questions about what we apparently know that I don't know.
Okay.
What does it mean? Does it mean more branching? Does it mean more surface area? What does it mean?
I think it's those two things, which will be part and parcel of the same thing. That more branching, capillary beds have a higher surface area to volume ratio than arterioles, which have a higher surface area to volume ratio than arteries. Like, the bigger the diameter, the low of the vessel, the lower surface area to volume ratio.
If you control for body size, if you take males and females who are the same size, are males more vascularized than females?
This is the consensus. I've never done. I've only done gross anatomy, and obviously not in humans either. So I understand that to be true, but it is based on other people's actual empirical work. So I haven't seen it with my own eyes. That sort of check, like, oh, can you see more?
Right, but it's not obvious to me that we would even necessarily.
You shouldn't be able to see at the level of obviously capillary beds. You can't see that through our.
Well, if males are more vascularized because males are bigger, and therefore there's more, if you were to count, linear units of.
Well, but linear won't do it, right? Like, so, the highly branched tiny vessels in the capillary beds have, basically all the blood, there's a ton of blood in parallel, but in different vessels with a high surface area to volume ratio through which you can have gas exchange outside and into and out of. Whereas the gas exchange that happens along a vein or an artery that's leaving the heart or a vein that is approaching the heart is going to be much lower because there's a lot more blood that's just in the interior of the vessel and it doesn't have access to the boundary.
But if I take a cubic centimeter of heart,
mm-hmm.
Is there something I can measure that tells me this is more likely to have come from a male than a female?
I think so.
Okay. All right. I would be surprised, but
I think so, but I'm not totally sure.
All right. So you could make an argument.
That's what this hypothesis is based on, and it It does. It's a hypothesis informed by the observation that men are more prone to myocarditis than women.
Big caveat for me, I want to know that the tissues are more vascularized rather than the individuals are more vascularized, but by virtue of the fact they're just bigger.
No, it's the understanding that I have taken from the medical literature is that it controls for body mass.
Okay. So if that is the case, then the point is male competition, which has all kinds of consequences, makes males stronger and also makes them shorter lived, more fragile in the end. That competition also would drive it drives more extraordinary capacity. The reason that male athletes outcompete female athletes in things like strength, even if body size is similar, has to do with the fact that there's a trade-off. How much are you capable of, and how long will you be capable of it, for example, in which there is more borrowed from longevity in order to get capacity. And greater vascularization would be correlated with greater feats of strength, let's say, and it could result in greater vulnerability to the mRNAs ending up in tissue that can't afford it.
Indeed. All right. We're at a little over an hour. Let me find maybe 2 more questions. This is a big question. I'll ask it, but thank you for such an enthralling, enlightening, and sexy podcast. What are your thoughts on the Pfizer data released from FDA on the 1st? I've barely dipped in at all, but
you're talking about page 30?
I don't know. I don't know what's on page 30.
Oh man, I do.
Sounds like room. What's the room number in 1984?
Oh,
we talked about it on this podcast. Anyway,
I've forgotten.
Page 30.
Well, it's not just page 30, but it starts on page 30.
Does it?
Yeah, there's a list.
Oh, yes.
That goes on.
I didn't know that was page 30. Yes, it goes on for like 9 pages.
I don't know what to think about it, right? Because on the one hand, wow, that's an impressive list of adverse events. On the other hand, I don't know. I want a calibration.
Right.
I want to know, the fact is, if every time anybody complained of anything over some long period of time after being vaccinated, the longer the period of time you measure it, the less impressive that list is. The more that list looks like a list for everything else, the less impressive it is. So I don't know what to think about it, but it certainly got my attention. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, 2 more things. This is just a comment and then the final question. People wake up to read news to find out the anger of the day. Some people don't do that. So that's just a comment. Wake up to read the news to find the anger of the day.
Yeah, it's actually there is something nice in that, in the sense that, especially I cannot believe, I think of us as smart, but we are apparently not smart to have banished our phones from our bedside. It's just become too complicated to know what to substitute for them. But
not smart enough to have done so yet.
Yes.
Yeah, so, every couple of months we're like, God, we really need something, an alarm by the bed that's not a phone.
Somebody should come up with a clock that makes noise at a particular moment in the morning.
But not something that's going to just blare you awake and destroy the rest of your day.
Right. And the problem is, very frequently I read on the damn thing before I go to bed, which is dumb in its own right. But
yes.
But nonetheless, it has been hard to get that thing out of there, even though it's pretty obvious that it has no place by the bedside, among other reasons, because we all have these things by the bedside, and we do tend to wake up and find out what the anger of the day is, and then at some point you have your coffee and you brush your teeth and you go on Twitter and enact the anger.
So I read, I think I may have shared it on here, but I read somewhere someone was like, okay, if you don't look at, and they weren't calling it the anger of the day, although I like that. If you don't look at the anger of the day in bed first thing, it's probably on the toilet, isn't it? Like, oh boy.
Yep. Yeah. And just something. I think the problem is it is too much power for those devices, which are hooked into a small number of channels and algorithms, to synchronize our annoyance, so that we all, emerge from our domiciles primed for a fist fight.
Okay, final question, totally different.
Mhm.
You ready?
Okay.
It's not horrible.
Oh,
I know.
that is different.
Right? Not that the questions have been horrible, but the topics that we are stuck on are horrible. Could historically seasonal diets epigenetically change people to seasonally get kids with different behavior, giving astrology some merit?
You'll never guess where that hypothesis shows up. We have it very
Right here. Yeah.
carefully laid out in
Carefully
the book.
laid out.
And I would say
And we don't use all of those words, but
no, and this version that they put forward is more limited because it's entirely diet focused.
right. But I like it. I actually had not, it's specifically about diet. But the point is, as we make in the book, astrology absent where you were born can't have any predictive power at all, and that's that is how it is generally understood in modern times. But with the inclusion of place of birth, absolutely there are going to be seasonal differences.
Well, it in principle could work and probably has worked when place of birth was included, maybe not even explicitly because it was just that the person you were consulting was local as
well,
you
no,
were.
but I mean, I think many forms of astrology actually do specifically and explicitly include place of birth.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody has collected the data set that would allow them to interpret that information. The point is, if people who come from Saskatchewan and are born in March have particular temperamental quirks,
Right.
then that's a pattern that has a reasonable explanation.
Right, but the
point is-
Saskatchewan March babies and the Sydney March babies should have precious little in common on account of their seasonality being flipped.
Right. And somebody who was doing, so I think the point is it's not astrology, right? It may once upon a time have been, but the person doing it would have to, be sensitive not only to where you were born, but how long you were there, whether the
Yes, we talked about that when we mentioned this on air a little while
Right.
back. Yep.
Whether the period of time, the 5 or 10 years after you were born in whatever location you were born in were typical or atypical of the, the
Yeah, if you had a
weather
100-year
regime.
flood or it was a famine,
Right.
all bets are off in terms of predictability. Yeah.
But the basic premise of your question is sound, which is that there are patterns
Yep.
that alter 1 month from the next, and where you enter the cycle is going to have a developmental impact. And so therefore people who enter the cycle at the same moment in a different year are liable to have some of those patterns repeated. So anyway, yeah, it does open that possibility, but I don't think anything that flies under the flag of astrology in modern times has the prerequisite of having tracked those patterns as a function of location of birth.
All right. Cool.
Yes.
We did it.
Well, we'll find out.
No, I think we already found out.
Oh,
We did it.
all right.
We will be back next week for episode 118, which is also not prime. You'll be
That one
surprised
I
to
got.
learn. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't even feel prime.
Yeah, nothing about it feels prime. In the meantime, we encourage you to consider finding us on our Patreons with the understanding that we may be switching it up a little bit soon since all that misdis and malinformation is about to get a lot of people in trouble. Check out the book. Check out Hunter Gatherer's Guide. Check out naturalselections.substack.com. Yeah, maybe that's it.
At least once this week, achieve greatness.
Achieve greatness. Be good to the ones you love. Eat good food. And get outside.
Be well, everyone.